For your vocabulary notes video today, you will need IC73. This is part 2 of standard 17. So the title should say angles with vertices on circles. We're going to move forward from all of the vocabulary and the arc measures and central angles that we talked about in class 72 and learn about 2 other types of angles today and how the arcs and the angles are connected together. The first type of angle we're going to learn about is called an inscribed angle. So that is an angle whose vertex, remember that's the corner of the angle, is on a circle, and the sides of the angle are going to contain chords of the circle. Remember, chords are segments that have both endpoints on the circle. So AB is a chord, and then this side of the angle contains that chord. AC is a chord, and this side of the angle contains that chord, and then the vertex, the corner A, is right there on the circumference of the circle. So this angle right here is an example of an inscribed angle, angle BAC, or you could call it angle CAB. An intercepted arc is going to be an arc that lies in the interior of an inscribed angle, and it has endpoints that are on the angle itself. So if we look at this picture, inside this angle, we see this arc. The endpoints of that arc are B and C. And so for this inscribed angle, angle BAC, arc BC is the intercepted arc. Now what are we going to do with that information? Well, we have several theorems to look through today that tells us what the relationship between these inscribed angles and intercepted arcs are. So inscribed angle theorem number 1. If an angle is inscribed in a circle, so if it looks like this, then its measure is going to be half the measure of the intercepted arc. So the angle is half of the arc. The angle is half of the arc. So if we're filling out this little equation, angle B in this picture is an intercepted arc, chord over here for the side, chord over there for the side. If we extended that angle out a little bit farther, the interior arc starting at A and ending at C would be arc AC. So this theorem is telling me that this angle is half the measure of arc AC. Accidentally wrote a B there for a second. Not sure why. Arc AC. So if I knew that this angle was 30 degrees, then I would know that this arc is 60 degrees. The angle is half the arc. Inscribed angle theorem number 2 takes it a little bit farther, and it talks about what happens if we have 2 inscribed angles of a circle that intercept the same arc. So think about that. Angle B right here is an inscribed angle. If we follow out those 2 chords for sides, this arc AC is going to be the intercepted arc. Angle D over here is connected to chord AD and chord CD, intercepts the same arc. Well, if they intercept the same arc, then that means they're both half of the same number. So they must be congruent to each other. The measure of angle B will equal the measure of angle D in that picture, because both angles intercept that same arc, AC. Inscribed angle number 3 looks at it from a different perspective. This investigates what happens if an inscribed angle intersects both endpoints of the circle's diameter. So let's go ahead and look at that in the picture. So we've got angle G, which has chord GE and chord GF, but that means that E and F, we can see it dashed in there, are endpoints of the circle's diameter. That means that this arc that is intercepted is actually a semicircle, which, if you think back to yesterday, is equal to 180 degrees every single time. So if our inscribed angles are half of our intercepted arcs, that's why they have this marked as a right angle, because half of 180 degrees is always going to be exactly 90. So the measure of that inscribed angle G would be exactly 90 degrees. One more inscribed angle theorem, and then we've got one more type of angle to wrap up our vocabulary notes for today. Inscribed angle theorem number 4. If an entire quadrilateral, think back in your brain, quadrilateral, that's a four-sided shape. So if an entire quadrilateral is inscribed in a circle, that means that all four corners, all four vertices of the quadrilateral can be found on that circle's circumference. We're going to focus in on its opposite angles. So an example of opposite angles would be angle B, and then down here, angle D. Or we could have focused on angle A and angle C. Those would be opposites. So if we look at angle B and we follow out the chords to find our intercepted arc, it would be right there, starting at A, ending at C. And then if we go to its opposite angle and we follow that out with its chords, that's intersecting this arc over here between A and C. But do you notice how those two arcs that are intercepted, the pink one and the green one, end up covering the entire circle? So if we added those arcs together, they would be equal to 360 degrees. Angles that are inscribed are half of the arc. So if I add the angles together, that's going to be half of 360, otherwise known as 180 degrees. We had a vocabulary word for that back in first semester, supplementary. So that's the conclusion of this theorem. If a quadrilateral is inscribed in a circle, then its opposite angles are supplementary. They add up to be exactly 180 degrees. So it works for angle A and C. Those are not the ones I used. And it also works for the ones I used, angle D and angle B. So two sets of opposite angles which are supplementary in any kind of inscribed quadrilateral. Okay, inscribed angles, lots of things we can do with them, so we'll have lots of examples in class of using those 4 theorems. The last thing we need to talk about today is what a tangent chord angle looks like and how we would find its measure. So these tangent chord angles are going to happen when a tangent and a chord, go figure, because that's what it's called, intersect at a point that is still on the circle, like the inscribed angle. So if we look at what we've got going on, this would be the tangent because it's intersecting the circle once, and then BD would be the chord because it's intercepting that circle twice. They've actually turned that chord into a secant by extending it out. And what happens when we have a tangent and a chord or a secant that intersect is we end up with 2 angles. We've got angle 1, we've got angle 2. This type of angle has the same relationship as an inscribed angle does. So this is still going to have a situation where the angle is half the measure of the intercepted arc. But the intercepted arcs are a little bit harder to find for some people. So if we look at this angle 1, it starts right here, and then inside angle 1 is this entire arc. That is definitely a major arc, so we need to use 3 letters to name it. We're going to do the endpoints as the first and the third letter. So B and D are where it starts and stops. And then a point on the pathway in between. So R would measure that. But we're going to have to remember that it's half. So that angle 1 is half the measure of angle B of arc, BRD. Angle 2 is a little bit easier to see. That's a minor arc, so we only need 2 letters, so that's going to be half of the measure of just arc BD. All right, that's it for your vocabulary notes for today. Bring those back tomorrow, and we will do lots of examples to practice applying the information to solve problems.